Rob is the executive producer at Lux Virtual, a creative studio that facilitates strategic marketing and a focus on visual storytelling through graphics, video, and animation to simplify and illuminate brilliant ideas. In 2017, Rob completed a 146-mile run across Death Valley to the top of Mount Whitney, raising almost $700,000 for End Polio Now, which is Rotary's global campaign to eradicate polio. In October 2020, Rob took on the world's toughest ultra-ironman known as the Uberman, and in a year of uncertainty, helped local groups fighting human trafficking raise over $50,000. Rob, welcome. You have the floor.
So I want to make sure I keep this as concise as possible, so I have a few minutes at the end. With this group, I especially wanted to share a little bit more about the focus on human trafficking and some of the overcoming than I do some of the other talks. So I want to start from the beginning with Rotary, because I'm going to focus on just how important Rotary is to me in being successful in this. So when I was in high school, I had found my faith back in my freshman year, and I didn't have the depth of knowledge. Or give me just a second. Okay, you can watch the show, buddy. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, so they're in the background. But I found my faith, and I just didn't have the depth of like knowledge of reading and research. And I remember walking through the high school hall one day, and I was like, I just wish I could get away for like 3 months and just read and dive into this. And I remember over the loudspeaker, they were talking about Rotary exchange students. And so I was like, oh, that'd be great. I could spend a summer away. So I ended up going to the meeting, and they were talking about these year-long exchanges. And I remembered like, why did I want to do this? And the reason was to learn about spirituality and learn about what the mind and body could do. So the 3 cities that I asked to go, or the 3 countries I asked to go to, were India, Egypt, or Thailand. And my district up here in Washington had never sent anyone to India. So I ended up getting the opportunity to travel to India for a year. And this was really the start of kind of just this unbelievable shift in my mind of what was possible and where we could go in the world. So you see on this picture, you see the suitcases, and that was my newfound faith. And then I was a wrestler. So I've always been really into athletics. And to understand the way I do life, it's, if you understand, like I'm pretty fanatic. I tend to overdo everything I do. And so while I was over in India, I was 16 years old, and I got introduced to this guy who was really into breaking world records. So he had like 17 world records at the time. And he roped in 16 of us to do 50 hours of nonstop aerobics. So it was a little over 2 days straight. You had to keep moving the whole time. And so at 16 years old, my whole framework for what was possible physical just shifted. And all 16 of us made it through. And I came back from that Rotary year after staying with a couple of Hindu families and a couple of Muslim families and doing any and every meditation camp. I did a 10-day camp where we couldn't talk, couldn't exercise, and just to immerse myself in what it's like to be a spiritual human and understand your body and your mind and your spirit and how all that kind of interacts. So it gave me such a full understanding of spirituality that at 16 years old, it just gave me a good benchmark to grow off of. So that was my introduction to Rotary. And I remember telling myself, if I ever got in a position where I had a company or had a job where I could go to Rotary meetings, that was the club I would join. And that happened when I was when I was 31. I got married and moved to Los Angeles, and I started my own company. And the first thing I did was I looked for a Rotary club and a Chamber of Commerce, and I found the Playa Venice Club in Los Angeles. And I want to go through these next few slides pretty quickly so I can get the other ones. But that Rotary exchange year was a shift in my thinking. And the next big one, I've been doing ultra sports for 20 years. And there's a lot of like, you go out there and you fail, and then you figure out what you screwed up, and then you fix it and you go again. And so I spent like 10 to 15 years doing that, just growing and learning the fundamentals. And then the Race Across America I did in 2016. And this one was another one of those just amazing shifts. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Race Across America, It's a 3,000-mile nonstop cycling race. You have 288 hours to go from Annapolis, Maryland to, or from Oceanside, California to Annapolis, Maryland. So you're literally nonstop on the bike for 12 days. So you jump on the bike. I rode the first like 36 hours straight, and then I slept for 45 minutes, and then rode for another, like 21 hours, and then you sleep for like an hour and a half. And going into it, like just not knowing how my body's going to be on day 3 or 4, let alone day 7 or 8. And you come out of an experience like that, and it's almost like, like if you play video games, being like a level 5 or 7 character, and you pass through this 2 week experience, and all of a sudden you're at like level 20 or 30. Or it's like going into middle school, taking history, and 2 weeks later you pop out and you're like, midway through your college career. So you just come out a completely different and changed person. And and the way you interact with people is different. The people in your circle are different. So it's just a shift in your ability level. And I find that anytime you take on these adventures, whether it's a 1,000-mile bike ride like Simon's doing, or doing a Camino, like hiking across northern Spain, you have these shifts in who you are and how effective you're able to be. So as we mentioned in the bio, after Race Across America, I ended up doing, in Race Across America, I figured out the fundraising and awareness components a little bit better. I tried to do it earlier in my career and just never got it together. But that one, I watched what the group 3,000 Miles to a Cure did, and then I just modeled best practices. So I copied what they did. The thing about Badwater is I teamed up with Rotary District 5280, so it's the Los Angeles district. The district governor took it on as one of her 4 major events for the year. So I had the opportunity to speak at the district breakfast. She went around all the clubs and talked about polio and this event we were doing. And for me, like the ultra events that I do, it's a way to bring people together and to share about what you're passionate about, and then to draw people into the adventure. So you can raise money and awareness through galas, you can raise it through golf tournaments. Like my particular gifting is ultra endurance sports. So that's what I choose to draw people's attention and to share stories. So with Badwater, we were able to do, I brought in my videographer. We had these parties during it. So when I hit these certain checkpoints, and when I got to the end, they had these live feed parties where we could, kind of link in. So I could bring people in on the journey as we went across. Those of you who aren't familiar with Badwater, it's from the lowest point in the U.S. to up to the top of Mount Whitney. You go through Death Valley, so it gets as hot as like 100, and I think it was 117 degrees the year I went through. And this picture is my crew. Another thing, especially with Rotary, the athlete, like you're just kind of the tip of the spear. Like your job is to just pedal or put every footstep or stroke when you're swimming, but it's really your crew that gets you through it. And on Badwater, like if I don't have my crew around me, I literally can't make it more than about 2 miles, because they're the ones that have the ice, they have my water, they have all the support. So it's like I can't get through these events without that support group. And I really do see that a lot as like Rotary in what I'm doing in these. Like I have my support crew and we can get so far. And then when I pull in the Rotary community, it just takes that to an exponential point where it's like you can be so much more effective and reach so many other people. So in this, and I tend to have like the people closest to me in this. There's one of my best friends in here, my son Hudson when he was a year old, my niece, my mother-in-law, and then a local nurse, because I usually keep nurses around me in case something goes sideways. And I'll skip over the Wanda Fucus one, but I decided to, so after Badwater, I wanted to get into doing, like, one of the things on my list was doing an ultra-ironman or an ultra-distance triathlon. And the problem is I'm just not a good swimmer. I'm slow. I'm kind of a tank in the water. I just push water. So I spent a whole year training, and I found this race, this event, kind of open course, from my hometown in Port Angeles up to Canada. So I had the opportunity to take that year to train to make sure that I could cover the swim portion of the ultra Ironman. And so I spent the whole year training, and then I ended up being in the water about 17 hours to cross the 18-mile section. And I was in the water for 17 hours, and I ended up getting close to the shore. And we got caught in this place called Trial Island, where you just kind of get whipped around in the currents and you keep hitting these cross currents. So after 17 hours, it was about 11 o'clock at night, and I had my last shot trying to hit this lighthouse, and I got within 700 feet of shore and hit a cross current, which pushed me back out to the middle of the strait. So my boat captain, I kind of talked to him, and I was like, my goal was just to make sure I could cover the distance. Is it okay if I, can we call it here? And he's like, yeah. He's like, in my mind, like, you made it. You covered the ground. And for me, I was like, I wanted to make sure that I could be on the water long enough, because the race I was doing the next year has a 21-mile swim. And so I was like, okay, I feel confident that I have a shot of getting it out of the water. And so thankfully, as we do these sports, I'm in there in the water, and I have these two boats. And so I have a person who can pull me out of the water. So I'm really, as much as it looks like you're in danger and you're pushing your edge, there's so many safety guidelines around us and people to pull us out when we're in trouble. So that was, a good training swim. And I just felt, even though I didn't make it shore, I felt really good about, being able to cover the distance and get comfortable in the water. And that leads me to Uberman. So I have a video, but the audio often doesn't play on it. So I'll just kind of describe Uberman, and then I want to go through the highs and lows. So Uberman is the world's toughest ultra endurance Ironman. That's what they stated as. So it's a 21-mile swim from Catalina Island to Palos Verdes, and then a 400-mile bike ride from Palos Verdes to Badwater Basin. And then you do the world's toughest ultra run, which is branded as the Badwater 135. So you go from Badwater Basin, which is a couple hundred feet under sea level, through Death Valley up to the Mount Whitney portal. And so I'll freeze on this screen. So the stories I wanted to share with you guys about Uberman, and I like hearing about John and his hip right before he does this thing, because I swear that always happens to me right before you do a major ultra. There's always something that comes up like a month before or 3 months before, where you just think to yourself, like, what am I doing and how can I pull this off, and am I even going to be able to get through this? And so going into Uberman, the swim was the big thing for me. I was like, if I can just get through the swim. And the swim, I started swimming at night because you have less wind at night. So I hit the shoreline, or the boat took us out to Catalina, and you jump off, and then I swim to shore, raise your hand, and then the race officially starts. And I started around 9 p.m. and you swim through the night. And the first half an hour was, you're kind of getting around the islands. There's little cross currents and stuff, but that's not too bad. And then I hit these like swells, and they weren't bad. It was just a little bit choppy. And because I'm not that great of a swimmer, like, you have to lift your arms a little bit higher. So within about 2 hours, my right arm was kind of strained. And so all of a sudden I'm swimming slower than I normally would. And so I pushed through for the first half of the night. And then finally it settled out a little. And one of the things is, like, you look at when daybreak comes, that's usually like this great moment where, like, oh, thank you, I made it through the night, I can just get through the day. And I remember when the daylight finally came, and I remember looking at the shoreline and how far it was off in LA, and looking back to the island, and the island seemed closer than the shoreline. And I was kind of talking to my crew, and at this point I was supposed to be at about 15 miles out of the 21 miles, and I just crossed the halfway point. So I was about 11 miles. So I was about 4 miles short of where I was supposed to be. So that, I kept pushing. And then after about 19 hours, I was at about 17 miles into the swim. So I had about 4 miles left. And over the last 3 hours, I'd only covered a little over half a mile. So 0.71 miles in 3 hours. And what had happened was a similar thing to in Canada, where I started hitting this cross current that was pushing me out to center and then down. So talking to the boat captain, we were like, it's probably going to be 6 to 8 hours before a shift. We might be able to get through, but you don't know. So my crew made the decision to pull me out of the water. So it was one of those, like, I just trained for a couple of years for this thing, and then it's just over. Like, you're out of the race. You get pulled into the boat. I had the boat captain drive me to shore. And then I talked to my crew and everyone. I was like, let's just take a good night's sleep and reset, and we'll start the bike ride in the morning. So of course I go back to the hotel, and when I get into these races, I'm so wired. Like I slept for about an hour and a half, and then I'm up and just wide awake and ready to go. But I just laid there for the night, and just, it's like, we make a plan. Let's wait till the morning. So we went out in the morning, started the bike ride. And the first evening in the bike ride, I remember my shoulder, I could barely even lift it, and my throat was pretty sore and swollen from the salt water. But by the end of the night, my arms started to get a little bit better, and my throat, I could breathe a little bit more. And this thought kind of hit me. And I remember I was like, I bet you I could reach out to the race director, and I bet you he'd let me finish the swim if I finished the rest of it. And so it was just a trigger of a thought kind of clicked in. And I remember later that night, I called I work with a life coach. Her name's Jody. And I called her up, and I was like, as much as I hate the water, I'm so afraid of it and this and that, I think I'm supposed to go back in. And so she was like, just give it a couple days. And then, if you still feel that way. And so I kind of thought about that, and then, made it through that first night on the bike. And then the second day on the bike, I was probably about 300 miles into the 400 miles. I'd slept a couple hours that night. And then in the afternoon, I just started flagging, where it's like you just get tired. And next thing I know, I'm like, I wake up and I was about a foot from the ground. So I'd fallen asleep on the bike, and I rolled the side of my ankle a little. I had some road rash on the side. And so I got up, and I had my crew put me in the van for about 20 minutes and take a little nap, and then back on the bike, and then rolling in. And I finished the bike. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and I remember going back to the hotel and just thinking like I could feel that sharp pain in my ankle, and I knew it was swelling, and I was like, oh great, like I'm starting one of the toughest runs in the world, and I have a sprained ankle. Like I don't even know if I can walk in the morning. So I, took a shower, went to bed, rested for a couple hours, and then getting up in the morning and going back out to the course. And I remember starting the course, I got my crew and everyone there, and I started just kind of walking and kind of feeling it out. And, and I have a slight little bit of pain, and within about a mile or two, it just goes to pressure. And I was like, oh, like, thankfully it was kind of a side sprain, so it didn't affect my forward movement at all. So I was like, oh, I think I'm going to be okay with this. And so that was the start of the run. And it's like, all right, so now I just keep moving one foot in front of the other. The first day went well there. I mean, I have really great crew around me. It ended up being about 105 that day in Furnace Creek, which in October, it's usually a little lower temperatures, but you're going through Death Valley, so it's still hot. But that first day I was okay. And then the second day on the run, something just happened on my body, and all of a sudden I could feel my pulse was higher. I was getting sweaty, this kind of dry sweat. And I was like, oh, I think I'm getting heat exhaustion. So I talked to my crew real quick, and I was like, I need to take a break. And so we had an RV with us on that section. So I got into the RV, and they're like, oh, lay down for like 15 minutes. I was like, no, I need a couple hours. Like I need to figure this out. So I took a cold shower, turned on the AC, and then I just called people. So I called a bunch of Rotarians, I called some mentors, and and I spent there for about 2 hours, because I wasn't tired. And in about 2 hours into it, all of a sudden I could feel my pulse going back to normal, and I was like, oh great, my body's regulating itself back to normal. And so I ended up getting out of there, and thankfully it was towards the end of the day, so the temperature was coming back down. And I was like, all right, like I'm in a better headspace, and physically I can keep moving. So that, that next section, kind of going into Lone Pine, which is about a 20-mile section before you hit the climb up the Whitney portal, was just one of the more joyful times in my life. Like I'm there with my niece and one of my mentors, Brian, who's a Rotarian, and my old training partner, Gay, who's coming into her 70s, and she's there we're walking mile sections at a time. And just having those voices of those conversations that I'd had with pastors and mentors in my head, it was like I'm in the middle of this journey. And the difference between the things I do, like I choose to do these stressful things and get myself in these situations where you're right on the edge of what's possible. But the way your body physically manifests, or that when you choose to be in those situations, is about the opposite of when these hardships happen to you and they're out of your control. So as much as you think like, oh, that's got to be the worst thing ever. It's like, no, actually, it's like, there's a part of it that's really hard, but it's actually the best thing ever, because there's a part of it that is, it's the way you grow and overcome things. So just being in the midst of that for days on that run was, for me, like some of the best things that happened to me. Um, and oh yeah, I wanted to tell you so what happened with the race director, as I was on the run, I had this full video crew with me. So I reached out to my videographer, and I was like, Luke, can you record something? And so I sat there on the side of the road, and I was like, Dan, who's the race director, I was like, Dan, like I got into this thing, and I knew the water was gonna be hard, and I couldn't finish it. Like I went and was as far as I could go, and there was this force outside of myself that I just couldn't pass through that. And and I'm here, and this is such a big event for me because of my personal background and all this stuff. Like and I just want to be able to cover 100% of the course, not 99% of it, but 100% of it. And if you're willing, if I finish the run, get to the top of Mount Whitney, and head back to the water, and finish the last 4 miles, get right back in where I left, and swim into shore, will you consider that an official finish? And I had Luke get the video to my wife, and my wife sent it off to Dan. And a couple hours later, as I'm coming in through the desert, I get the response from Dan, and he's like, absolutely. He's like, finish out the run, go down to down to Los Angeles, jump on the boat. I'll be there on the shore. We'll have the finishers hammered there waiting. And it was that kind of turning point where it's like you're back in the race. Like you find a way to get back into things when things look hopeless. So we made it to the portal about 6 a.m. I finished the climb up to, I think it's close to about 7,000 feet. Drove back to LA, and then LA is one of those, or in San Pedro, it was about as close as civilians get to special forces stuff. So it's like a 4 a.m. start. The boat captain meets us down there. We're on the small little 17-foot like Navy SEAL type inflatable, and they take us out. It was this cloudy, like foggy morning, so they flip us off in the middle of the ocean, like 4 miles off the coast at 5 a.m. And one of my mentors is he's also one of my clients, Gareth, who sponsored a lot of the video stuff on this. He was a kayaker on the first section, and I had my wife talk to him. He was like, Rob's going to get back in the water and finish it. And he was like, I want to be there. And my wife's like, you can't, like, there's not enough room for the kayak. And he was like, I want to be there with them. And my wife's like, well, you could swim with them. And so when I got there that morning, Gareth was there in his wetsuit, and he swam with me the whole last 4 miles in. And after, like, for these events, it's hard to explain how hard they are. But the swim, the first one was the hardest day of my life, like physically and psychologically. And then the second one, that last 4 miles, was the second hardest day of my life. And it's because you're so exhausted and you're sleep deprived. And I remember getting in the water, and you're in and out of consciousness. Like you have that 1,000-yard stare, and about half the time you're off in kind of la la land. And it's one of those, you can, because I've been in the state so much, like you can almost feel your spirit separate from your body, and you're trying to like pull it back in, and and I can keep moving forward, but you're just not all there. And I, about halfway through the last 4 miles, I remember we can get in and out of the boat, and getting back in the boat and taking as much caffeine as I felt comfortable with, not hurting myself. So it's like a caffeine pill, like a Monster, a bunch of Cokes, and getting back in the water, and you're good for like a half an hour, and then you're off in this like zone. But eventually we end up making it towards shore, and coming on shore, you couldn't quite see it because of the fog. And I went into one of those zones where I was kind of out of it, and the captain's like, you're almost there. Like you're literally like 10 minutes out. And so I was like, all right. And so I remember getting to shore, and I still wasn't quite there, and people are talking to me, and I was like, oh crap, they're interviewing me. And so I paused for a second. I was like, give me a second, kind of took a deep breath, and you can kind of feel your essence come back in. And it's like, okay, I'm here. And you engaged with everyone, and and the Rotarians were there, like the past district governor was there, and Melody St. John, and all my Playa Venice Rotary friends and my crew. it was just one of those like magic moments, you know, sharing that kind of finish with them and then heading back and jumping back in the boat. But a thought I want to finish on is, um, you know, I remember thinking, and I've shared this a few times, but after the boat in Canada, when I didn't make it to shore, and I vividly remember like reaching out and grabbing Jack Church, my it was one of the captain of the boat, and having him pull me out of the water. And for those of us who have supports, we have people to pull us out of the water when we're in trouble. And for those people like going through human trafficking and others where they don't have the resources around them, they don't have anyone to pull them out. And so they're screwed and caught in those, they're caught in those like loops where they can't get out of it, and they hit these cross currents and there's no way they can push through. And I see our role as Rotarians and as people who care is, how can we be in those, and how can we be some of those support crew, and how can we be those people that can pull them out of the water to safety so they can go out and have another day and have another chapter of their life that's different than what it looks like. So part of these journeys is overcoming what you need to go through, and I'm just so thankful for the Rotary community, and how I've learned to raise awareness and to raise funding through teaming up with them on these incredible events. So thanks for the time just yeah, to share.
Rob, thank you. Wow. That was a powerful 15, 20 minutes of your journey, and just so, and I saw Cindy posted some of the lessons that she was learning, so many great lessons. A few of the notes that I took were, first of all, you talked about your crew, that you had your crew around you, but really realizing, you can't do this by yourself, and you actually need people who have skills and knowledge to not only help you along the journey, but be there with you. Like your reference to the nurse, that the races needed even a nurse, that you know, you have those people who know what they're doing and are with you. Also just having a safety net, knowing that not only are you not by yourself, but that safety net. You know, you talked about the boat being able to pull to safety in your swim by the boat captain. I think the lesson for me was, you know, I think we are all, many of us, and certainly, you know, my own experience is pushing the limits. My daughter keeps telling me that I need to keep getting out of my comfort zone. So it's not quite the limits that you were doing, but being willing to push ourselves personally, you know, professionally, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, past our comfort zone and pushing those limits. But don't do it ignorantly or without your training schedule. You know, you have your training schedule. You didn't just go out and run the race. You had a rigorous training schedule. And so I think doing that, but understanding and having that training and education, not giving up. Obviously, your story is a great story about not giving up despite all the obstacles that are put in your way. Also, just leaning on a support system. I think you made a number of comments about Rotary, about the groups, your family, your trainer. I love the story, your comment about your trainer who swam the last 4 miles with you. And that's just a beautiful, not only leaning on your support system, but asking them to literally walk or swim beside you. And I loved your analogy to ending human trafficking, that that you got pulled out of the boat, but there are, you know, our challenge is to walk alongside those and find to end human trafficking, not only to support the victims, but also try to prevent them and create that that boat and that support system, that they don't get sucked into it in the first place. So amazing. And I'm sure we all have our own lessons, but thank you so much.
And Alka has a question.
All right, Alka.
First of all, Rob, thank you for inspiring us this morning of your determination, your very this thing of not giving up and just achieving those goals that you had first set. Having said that, I wanted to ask you, who has been your inspiration or a role model in your life as well?
Yeah, the role models are important. It's interesting because I feel like I've had these mentors and role models, and I call them almost adopted families through each phase of my life. So I, when I went to college, like I had this family that kind of took me in, and when I went to Los Angeles, it was kind of that Rotary family. Early on, Gene Davis, he's an Olympic he was an Olympic wrestler back in the 60s. He was a mentor to me. So I did a lot of traveling with wrestling, and so I've just always kind of kept in touch with Gene, and he's been one of those centers to me, like watching him and the way he interacts with athletics and the way he treats his family. He's got kids and his wife while he's doing all these things has really been one of those central figures for me.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Rob. We will be anxious to hear what your next challenge is going to be and be there to support you in whatever way that we can.